All right, well, it's 11:46 now, so I think we can get started on the next presentation. So again, thank you very much for joining us, Kelly.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to present this project. Really excited about this project. So again, I'm Kelly Clayton. I work for Yakima Nation Fisheries. I do habitat restoration within the ceded lands off reservation. So just wanted to point that out. My project area is in the upper Yakima in Natchez, and this project is located between Ellensburg and Clayellum in Thorpe, Washington. So the project is Taneum Creek Raghart Habitat Enhancement, and we contracted with Natural Systems Design to complete the engineering design. And we have several partners involved in this project. The Bureau of Reclamation and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife are the landowners. We have irrigation infrastructure located within the project reach, operated by the Kittitas Reclamation District. And we also have Bonneville Power Administration funding, as well as RCO funding from a previous surfboard grant, already funding a portion of this project. And this request is for funding next year to implement the second half of this project that I'm going to talk to you today about. Like I said, it's located on Taneum Creek, near the mouth of Taneum Creek, about River Mile 2, above Interstate 90 in Thorpe, Washington. And not to repeat myself from the last presentation, but these are the priorities. It's a focal area, focal action 18. It's a couple of actions identified in the Yakima Basin Stillhead Recovery Plan. But I wanted to point out this assessment that was completed last year in June for KRD by Jacobs, the Yakima Basin Managed Aquifer Recharge Assessment, and it was funded by YBIP. In that assessment, Taneum Creek ranked #1 for having available infrastructure in place to do some groundwater recharge. And so I can talk about that more towards the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to point that out. Out of these were the top 20 sites for groundwater recharge in the Yakima Basin, and Taneum Creek was ranked #1. So here's the project reach. Down at the bottom, the lower end of the reach, the Raglan site, the Raglan Reach is part of the L.T. Murray Wildlife Area. Yakima Nation acquired that property. We closed on that acquisition finally after 4 years or 5 years, I'm not sure, with Bonneville Power Administration funding. And then we transferred ownership over to WDFW, and it's now managed as part of the L.T. Murray Wildlife Area. The previous landowner, his name was Frank Ragland, and he still lives adjacent to the property, hence the name Ragland. And this is, I'll talk more in detail about this site, but this site is where we already have an RCO grant from 2018. There are still folks on the tag that participated in that site visit and are familiar with this site, but I'll talk more about that. Moving upstream, so this has been previously, these were 2 different projects that were being developed by Hoda Sandasi. We had contracted with a geomorphologist that wasn't a licensed engineer, but due to concerns with downstream infrastructure, we contracted with an engineering firm. Due to the risk associated with this particular site. Moving upstream, we leave the DFW property and move on to Bureau of Reclamation. And that, I've delineated 4 other sub-reaches within this reach, but it's called the Heart K property. There is some DFW ownership south of the creek above this siphon. So you see this infrastructure bisecting the project reach right here in the middle of the Heart Cave reach, going from Taneum Road all the way to Taneum Creek. It's perpendicular. It's a siphon, an underground siphon, and overflow channel that KRD operates for irrigation, and it goes right through that project reach. And the majority of the ownership is Bureau of Reclamation, except south of the creek above the siphon is DFW. Advancing slides is working so great, and now it's stopped. Just a second. Oh, there you go. So GLO surveys from the late 1800s identified a braided channel through the whole valley bottom through this reach. And as you can see, it's been pushed against the southern hill slope and runs along the hill slope. And now it's pinched right there on the down, right where that siphon and overflow channel you see bisecting the floodplain. The creek has to go through that little pinch point. And so infrastructure does limit us on what we're able to do here. And I'll talk more in detail about the long-term plans at this particular site later at the end of my presentation. But I just wanted to point that out, that exists, and the creek has to go through there. We don't want to impact the infrastructure, but it was a braided channel all through this. And it's upstream of the interstate. We've got Taneum Road, Thorpe Cemetery Road, Man Ditch, I believe, that runs along Taneum Road up at the north, and then you have Taneum Creek. We have a diversion structure downstream of the siphon as well, and we are avoiding that area for this particular project, and I can show you that in the design sheets as they come. So peak flows are typically occurring between April and June. It's dominated by snowmelt runoff regime. So I just wanted to put this in there. I got some feedback earlier today that including hydraulic information would be helpful for folks. So I threw this in there last minute so that you could see that we did some hydraulic modeling and I'll get into more detail on the sites that we're avoiding for there's a stream gauge right in the middle of this reach that KRD monitors and manages. So limiting factors to fish habitat: low pull frequency, lack of aquatic cover, lack of physical complexity, poor connectivity to the floodplain, loss of channel length, elevated stream temperatures, and reduced large wood recruitment potential. So I wanted to breeze through these quickly because I want to make sure there's enough time for questions and to run through the site. So heavily incised channel, and we have riprap along the banks at two particular locations that we'd like to remove and not part of this phase, but in the future. And I've identified, and I'll talk more about that more towards the end of the presentation as well for our long-term strategy. Showing the riprap, we have some exposed banks, and you can see the vertical cut banks and incised channel. So the current condition of Taneum Creek. So proposed actions: increase frequency and quality of pool habitat, increase complex cover, increase connectivity, increase channel length, increase the likelihood that beavers will recolonize. And we're going to do that by proposing the installation of channel spanning wood structures, so ELJs, and placing unanchored loose wood within structures and above structures, and then plant eroding banks to provide riparian cover. So I'm going to breeze through these because I don't want to spend too much time. So here's what an example of an engineered log jam that we've implemented on Toppenish Creek. So an example of what the structures will look like. Showing they're not fully channel spanning, but the idea is that they'll act and function as channel spanning structures. So it's still allowing water to move around the structures. So there's still passage. And then again, the unanchored wood is going to be placed within the structures and above structures, weaved into existing stream vegetation, as well as loosely placed in the channel. And we've done modeling to show at the 100-year flood event that loose wood will not overtop our engineered structures. Here's it's been very successful in the North Fork Teanaway. So you can see the loose wood placed here and the nice gravel deposited just from having the roughness in the channel. Working with our partners, KRD and Bureau of Reclamation and WDFW, as well as Washington Department of Transportation and Kittitas County, we are avoiding particular areas to protect monitoring sites and downstream infrastructure. So there was concern for obviously the county bridges downstream and the interstate, as well as above this siphon and overflow channel, as well as the Taneum diversion downstream of the siphon as well. So we've just decided to avoid all of those areas with loose wood. And you can see the areas that we identified upstream, incorporating them within ELJs and upstream of ELJs. And just to point out that WashDOT and Kittitas County did sign off on this project. And we got through our HIP 4 programmatic for ESA, and everybody's happy with what's being proposed. So we've delineated this into 5 sub-reaches, and I'm going to go through them one at a time. Starting at the downstream end, the Raglan Reach. Again, there's a little bit of history on this particular site, especially with the tag. We were awarded a grant for fish passage in 2018. And the scope of that grant was to restore fish passage and habitat quality and improve floodplain connectivity to 1,400 feet of Taneum Creek by placing abundant woody material in stream to raise the channel bed and by excavating pilot channels to promote high flow channel development. We are doing all of that except for excavating pilot channels. There was a lot of concern for the freeway there, and they liked where the channel was going, and so we're working within that constraint. So what we've proposed is installing ELJs and placing loose wood within this reach, and the status of the the former fish passage barrier. You can see in 2018 it was a vertical drop, believed to be a seasonal barrier to juvenile fish, about 3.5-foot drop, and there is a head cut there, and that head cut, so you can see the image on the right from 2020, just this last year. You can see where a bunch of debris piled there, and you can see that there's flow around the right of or looking downstream on the left bank. You can see water, surface water moving around the structure. So there's obviously passage. And the head cut has since migrated upstream. We've identified a couple head cuts above this. So we want to address those head cuts from further channel incision by adding roughness to the channel. So we're staying within the scope of the grant, and we're adding abundant woody material in the form of ELJs and loose wood to address that and enhance in-stream habitat for fish. That is planned for construction this year. I'm aiming for September of this year. We will construct the Raglan Site 1, Reach Site 1, And it is the Heart K reach that I'm requesting funding for to implement next year, which would pay for ELJs and loose wood plus riparian planting. So part of this grant also includes planting the raglan reach. And so so it's all connected as one big project. It won't advance again, just a second. Oh, there you go. All right, so in 2018, we were under contract with Hoda Sandasi, who's a geomorphologist, not a licensed engineer. So that was the pushback. It was a great project that he had proposed, but there was just a lot of concern for downstream infrastructure. So we were met with challenges with all agencies involved. So we decided to start over with Natural Systems Design. And this is the design that they have produced for the raglan reach. So site number 1. If you look closely, you can see the loose wood placed in the structures and upstream of the structures, and we've omitted them from certain areas for a reason. The loose wood's all upstream. And so this is being implemented as part of the 2018 grant, but for this 2021 grant ask, I'm planning riparian planting in here. I'll get into the details of the budget, but what I've since decided was to include the riparian planting as match. So the riparian planting, I'm actually now proposing to use BPA funding. So I'm only asking RCO to pay for the ELJs and the loose wood, but we can talk about that more at the end of the presentation. But I just wanted to point that out. But I haven't identified where the planting polygons are in this particular reach, but I have in the Heart K. So we'll get into them. Moving upstream, leaving the LT Murray Wildlife Area. Now we're entering the Heart K reach, owned mostly by the Bureau of Reclamation. So site number 2, moving upstream. We have ELJs proposed and loose wood. And there's a fence that crosses the creek. We worked with DFW on trying to avoid that fence and have moved structures around to avoid wood mobilizing and impacting that fence. So this is what's being proposed in site number 2. And as you can see, site number 3, we don't have anything proposed in site number 3. We've got that diversion. We have a stream gauge in there that KRD operates for monitoring. And we just decided, we tried working in that reach, and we just decided due to budget limitations, we would focus in these other reaches and did not include this as part of the plan. Although we have this nice floodplain in here, it would be great to do some work in there, but we just, for the limitations of the budget, we decided to just leave that alone. So moving upstream to site number 4, I want to point out this is the reach, the site that has the siphon and that overflow channel. You can see it going, it's perpendicular to the creek, going right through the lower end of this site. So zooming in, you can see on the right, you have the overflow channel. You have a KRD road that goes right along that overflow channel, and then the siphon is buried right next to it upstream, and I believe that siphon is pretty shallow. So there's been a lot of disturbance there. And then the creek goes right through a small bridge at the downstream end. We are proposing all of the work in site number 4 upstream of this siphon. Again, you can see the ELJs that we're proposing, and you can see the loose wood, which is all up at the top of this reach. We didn't propose any loose wood near the infrastructure. Here's some imagery of the siphon, which looks like under construction. You can see where it's at, the overflow channel right in between the siphon and the road. Taneum Road goes right through the middle of this picture. So imagine yourself standing on that road, looking down the overflow channel towards Taneum Creek. That's what the image is on the left. It was taken on Taneum Road, looking down the channel, the overflow channel. Siphon, looking at the photo on the left, the siphon would be buried to the right of the channel, and then you can see the KRD road to the left of the channel, and all of those trees down there at the bottom, that's Taneum Creek. What I want to point out here is all of those trees. So the GLO surveys said that this was black cottonwoods dominated throughout the valley bottom. And you can see that all of that has been removed. You can see that in the picture on the left, all of that vegetation's gone. Okay, so moving upstream to site number 5. I have to move this window around to see my image, so I apologize for the pauses. So we have several ELJs proposed, lots of loose wood. I want to point out that this is where the elk exclosure exists, south of the creek. You can see it in this image. Look at all of the mowed tracks through all. So there's active mowing inside the exclosure. And what I want to point out is that there's mowing right up to the edge of the bank, our exposed banks with no vegetation. And I'm going to show that. You can see it right on Google Earth. So zooming into this particular spot, there's this nice meander bend with the exposed bank, and look at the mowing tracks, literally right up to the bank. Look at the elk exclosure south of the creek. That's being mowed as well. So we did a site visit out here, and I want to just share these pictures with you. We've got lots of cottonwoods that are trying to grow, and we've got lots of volunteers moving out into the floodplain. So this picture here shows all of our nice little volunteers. And they're being mowed. So here's Tim Abbey. He's pointing at a little cottonwood down there. And then I've even taken a picture of a cottonwood that we've got mowing tracks going right over. So they're mowing around these clumps, and the cottonwoods aren't able to move out into the floodplain, and they're getting sprayed. So that's an issue. I've already mentioned that to the Bureau, so we're working through that. But anyway, there's been discussion on the elk browse out here, and I just want to point out that the mowing and veg management is also contributing to that. Low recruitment of riparian vegetation and a narrow riparian corridor through this reach. So as match funded by BPA, I want to do a big riparian planting project out here. I implemented this really cool technique used on South Fork Cowiche earlier this year in January. We contracted with Wildlands Incorporated, and they're an outfit out of Tri-Cities, but they have this expandable stinger is what they call it. And I'll just play this video for you. It's an attachment to an excavator, and you can see the man standing next to that expandable stinger. So what I'm recommending for this site is deep planting. So he's piercing the ground, and then the gentleman there is throwing live stakes and rooted plants into that receptacle, and then releasing it down into the ground. So we're able to achieve depths of 4 to 6 feet to engage plants with the groundwater table, which is an issue at this site. You can see the vertical cut, you can see the exposed vertical cut bank there, and that's what we're dealing with. The water table, the creek's incised, and these plants are struggling to survive and establish. So this would be a great site for some deep planting. So some more images of the planting areas that I would like to propose. This is the meander bend that I zoomed into with the mowing tracks up to the stream bank. I am also proposing some fencing around some key areas. I didn't identify in the Raglan Reach because there's this nice wetland there. So I'd love to hear some ideas about what I can do there. So I was looking at areas that we would heavily plant and would want to exclose from potential browse. And so I identified these 3 spots, couple meander bends, and then this lower part of above the siphon. So in the crisscross pink polygons is where I'd like to heavily plant and fence. And we could also plant inside this exclosure. The existing exclosure south of the creek, I mean, just look at this image. There's not a lot growing in there. You've got some little patches, but it's being mowed. So it's very curious. Why isn't that just flourishing with all of the browse being excluded? So we could do some monitoring in there and plant and see how changes in veg management and some planting, how that, if we can get some veg established in there, because that looks like it should just be covered in trees and it's just bare. So here's my updated budget since the last time I presented. I brought the price down about 75,000. I got bids for this project last Friday, so that's another reason for the updated budget. And I decided that all the riparian planting would be match, and I would use BPA funding for that. I kept it down to 15%, and I didn't want the metrics too high because sometimes things change, but I'm planning to go, I think that cost will be much higher than that in terms of match, but this is what I have proposed. I'm requesting RCO funding to pay for construction of ELJs and placement of loose wood, and that's it. So it's paying for mobilization, access and staging, buying root wads, constructing ELJs, placing loose wood, and that's it. So match would be BPA funding, paying for riparian planting, as well as engineering oversight. So all engineering, we would use BPA funding for and use as match. And we are requesting a few hours for grant administration for one of our Yakima Nation bookkeepers to administer the grant. So the total request is $259,900. Okay, so some of the questions I had, one was pertaining directly to elk browse and how I was gonna deal with that, which I feel like I've addressed. If there's more questions pertaining to that, feel free to ask. The other two questions were, describe the long-term plans for this site, including the siphon and recharge. Are they consistent with the proposed actions? So we have been working with KRD, the Bureau of Reclamation. We even had a big stakeholder meeting this last year, and I've been doing biweekly check-ins with folks. So we very much want this project to be in line with future plans for this site. One of the KRD's interests at this particular site is because of the infrastructure. So one of the ideas that they've proposed is recharging the floodplain there by that overflow channel, directing flows right onto the floodplain and rerouting it there. I can't speak to what KRD is planning, but we are working together, and we wanted to make sure that this project was in line with that. So we even got our engineers involved in talking with KRD. So they put together a little concept. Phase 1 is Yakima Nation's habitat work, which includes the channel spanning wood structures and riparian planting. Phase 2 would be engineered riffles, floodplain excavation, complex timber revetments, and the riprap removal. I'd love to pull that riprap out now. I kind of regret not including it as part of this phase, but it would be nice to use that for the riffles. So some projects to plan in the future. That would be phase 2 and phase 3. Just elevating the creek elevation, bed elevation. I think they were proposing 2 to 4 feet, and we would do that in a series of phases. And phase 4 would be irrigation infrastructure modification. So obviously the work that KRD is planning is going to take some time. They have installed monitoring wells. They completed their assessment, and now they're in a monitoring phase, but working together on getting water onto the floodplain, hopefully through our wood structures, as well as rerouting irrigation runoff. The last question was there is significant infrastructure here that make lateral plan form adjustments challenging. Yes, there are a lot of constraints associated with this project. We would love to move the siphon, the overflow channel, get the users off of Taneum Creek. But we'd also really like to get a project done here. The really neat thing is that what we're proposing can still allow all of that to happen. And so hopefully that answers that question. I believe this concludes my presentation. Please feel free to ask me questions.
Are there any follow-up questions from the TAG or the CC, particularly regarding some of the things that came up during the sponsor presentations?
This is Alex, and I'll just note that I really, am impressed by the work done between last visit and now to think more about what's limiting re-veg and how can that be incorporated into the project. So that was a neat example of a feedback loop, including some sleuthing on the ground. And I'll be really curious what the Bureau's reaction to possible changes in management to allow cottonwood growth would be.
So I agree, and I think that was a really great presentation. I am very curious to see the KRD monitoring wells. They installed a number of different groundwater monitoring wells out there and see what happens to the groundwater over the summer and see if it has any answers for what we're seeing in those big dry patches.
Thank you. Was that Danielle? I think I recognized her voice.
Yeah, it's me.
Hi. Thank you. I just received a report from Joel Hubble regarding what was installed. I'll kick it over to Danielle. It's kind of out of my area of expertise, but I'd love to keep you involved in that.
Sounds good.
I see
There's some questions in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to bring up. I see Rachel Little's question. Is there public access to these properties? Yes. If you could let me know, I could let the area managers know you'd like to access the properties. But we just did, I was able to allow contractors to go out there and walk the reach. I need to let Frank Ragland know, the adjacent landowner, downstream landowner. Mel Babick is the LT Murray Wildlife Area Manager. So I'd also let her know. And Jeannie Demarest is who I've been in contact with the Bureau. And Carrie Matthews also with the Bureau helping Jeannie. But you can access these properties. I would recommend not driving in if gates are open. Just park at the little parking lot there with the reader board and hike in. But again, if you could let me know, I could let all the folks know if you need access. But yes, there's public access. But maybe that was the question you were asking.
Pat, would you want to ask your question just about the project plans and understanding the ELJ?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I guess maybe I'm missing something, but from the plans I see, there's a really good plan view and a good detail of the ELJs, but I guess I was trying to understand better in a bigger picture, like in a stream channel profile, how the elevation of these 7-foot high structures are going to kind of reconnect the floodplain. And I assume that at some point sediment wood are going to plug these up and the channel bed is going to be elevated. So I'm just trying to understand kind of better the future conditions of how all this is going to fit together.
Right. So there's some areas that are more in size than others. There were some pictures of us standing in the channel where I think we can have really good potential for reconnectivity using log structures and depositing sediment and regrading the channel, slowing down the water. I think there's a lot of potential in key locations for where we're planning structures. There are areas where they're just too in size, and I don't think we'll achieve that. But I think we could. If there's more information I can gather from the engineers, I can also do that if that's what you're requesting.
Yeah, I think I had the same question. So the first thing I would do in terms of review is to start looking at some of the sections and profiles through there. And I just didn't see any.
My question, this is Jeanette Smith. My questions are the same. If the proposal indicates that this is at final design, but there's not a basis of design report that explains current conditions and expected proposed conditions and how that's achieved. And I think at this point, we need that in order to move this into implementation.
Bob had a question. Is there recreation access and will this impact that? I think we've sort of approached that, but
Sorry, this is challenging. I'm trying to take notes and answer questions. I think that's what the public access question was pertaining to. I realized that towards the end. There is hunting. Mel Babick had suggested maybe some signs to let hunters know when construction would be, but I don't think we're not gonna we're gonna avoid the hunting seasons, particularly modern firearm if it runs up to that. But our cutoff date, and speaking with Jen Nelson, was October 15th, but we're trying to implement in September, by the end of September. So that's our projection. But yes, there's hunting.
If I could just add to that, Kelly, Gross, the reclamation property, which is I think a bigger piece there, that has no trespassing signs posted.
Thank you, Sean. Yes.
Sounds like there isn't a public access.
LT Murray, yeah, public LT Murray Wildlife Area, but would have hunting. But I'm assuming I would need to consult Mel Babick to confirm.
This is Jen. There's public access on the WDFW portions, but there's no roads within this section. So because of the joint ownership with the Bureau, some of it is fenced off, sort of, for elk. But people have access to walk in from the opposite side, and they do.
Are there any other questions that would help Kelly as we move forward in the 2021 grant round to refine her application?
Could Kelly just address the question I think both Pat and I are struggling with, is that it says that final design is already completed, but we're not seeing any preliminary design or basis of design report that explains that. And is there something out there? Is it coming?
My question, there is a design report in Prism. Have you seen that report, or are you saying that what the information that you want is not included?
All that I could find in there was the plan sheets with no discussion. So if
Okay, yeah, there's a report in there. But I'm definitely gonna make sure that your questions are addressed in there. But I wasn't sure if you had seen that, but I thought initially what you were asking for wasn't included. But yes, if there's a design report uploaded on Prism, I can check to see what date that was, but it's in.
Yeah, and it looked like there's based on what's in that design report, it looks like there was a lot of modeling done, but there's no attachments that have like any of the modeling in it.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then we'll take our lunch break, and we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. Okay, well, with that, we'll break for lunch now. Thank you very much, Kelly. I really appreciate you coming back again. And we'll be hearing from Ethan Lockwood from Washington Water Trust at 1 o'clock.
And I've just pulled up, I'll put the link to the design memo in the chat for anyone that wants to take a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.